Reasons why I like to come to groups like this, because there's so many like-minded people, is know where your friends are. You know, if you do have to survive, you might pick a group that would be coming to an event like this to look forward and make your plan. You've got to know, your family, your friends, your neighbors, because it will get to that point because the system will quit working. And somebody said, well, what's that like? What would it be like? I said, well, maybe it quit working for 30% of the people in San Francisco. Maybe it'll be something like that, and it could be. But it doesn't have to be, because I think the answer to all this comes in the principled cause of liberty, personal liberty. Where does the liberty come from? It comes to us in a natural, God-given way, and we have a right to our lives, and we should have an absolute right to the fruits of our labor, and we should not be told how we should live our lives.
What's up, guys, and welcome to a special edition. Our focus, the legendary Ron Paul and his recent statement on the accelerated dollar collapse through the U.S. debt ceiling deal. Now, when it comes to predicting economic twists and turns, Ron Paul has been nothing short of a modern-day Nostradamus. He's been hitting the bullseye time and time again, leaving us in awe of his remarkable foresight. From his unwavering advocacy to end the Fed and his relentless pursuit of sound money, Ron Paul has truly earned the title of the Godfather among sound money and liberty enthusiasts.
Not yet. Didn't give you the signal yet. Now it comes. There is no authority in the Constitution authorizing a central bank, which means there should be no Federal Reserve System. No!
Ron Paul's wisdom continues to shine brighter than ever. Let's dive into the analysis of the recent U.S. debt ceiling deal and its potential implications on the dollar, and pay homage to the man who taught us what it truly means to fight for economic freedom. Let's go. And a lot of signal here. We're just going to read it. It's a short one, but from Daily Huddle, collapse of U.S. dollar dominance will be accelerated by irresponsible debt ceiling deal. Dr. Paul. Oh, and look here. We got some Tuttle twins. What are the odds? But here we go. America's Fiscal Responsibility Act will hasten a collapse of the U.S. dollar and force Americans to take the brunt of its fallout, according to former Congressman Ron Paul. In a new statement, Paul says that the deal, which suspends the U.S. government's debt ceiling for 2 years, will be felt by regular citizens in the form of an inflation tax. Sounds like a Bitcoiner? 'Cause he is. While not an official default, the former Texas representative believes it may as well be one, allowing the government to further expand the money supply, thus debasing the dollar and hurting the savings and wages of Americans. Quote, of course, this default will be felt by the people in the form of an inflation tax. This inflation tax may be the worst of taxes because it is both hidden and regressive. Politicians love to point the finger at greedy corporations, labor unions, and even consumers for increasing prices instead of taking responsibility for the legislation they pass that incentivizes the Fed to create more inflation. Paul argues that the agreement, which he says has nothing to do with fiscal responsibility, will also have negative effects beyond home soil. According to Paul, the 2-year removal of the debt ceiling will lead the U.S. to lose its world reserve currency privileges much sooner than anyone has anticipated. Quote, the Fiscal Responsibility Act will result in increased government spending, debt, and deficits. It will also further erode the value of the United States dollar, thus making it more likely that the U.S. dollar will lose its world reserve currency status sooner rather than later. The Fiscal Responsibility Act, fiscally irresponsible, and that's what he gets at here, is to fiscal responsibility as the Affordable Care Act is to actual affordable health care, and as the Patriot Act is to true patriotism. Perhaps a future Congress will introduce legislation that actually begins to cut back on the size and scope of government, called the Fiscal Irresponsibility Act. At the time of writing, the U.S. government's debt stands at $31.8 trillion, and we've talked about all those unfunded liabilities. Dr. Paul has called a spade for a long time, and we as more Austrian economists and sound money enthusiasts get it and understand how it works. But thanks to the foundation Dr. Paul laid with these principles, the opportunity to educate and offer the solution that is Bitcoin to most, if not all, our economic and fiscal issues, we're able to move that mission forward. And you know, Paul has been telling people WTF happened in 1971 since it happened. You know, he lived through it.
But another issue that I didn't go to Congress basically on it because I was influenced by what happened 50 years ago. In 1971, I was learning about Austrian economics, but in 1971, you know, Nixon closed the gold window, put on tariffs, and no limits at all in printing money, and this got a lot worse. But because we have been very rich and very blessed, both because of our country, because of the way that we have been able to maneuver and can have control of the reserve currency of the world, I mean, we've been able to export like nobody else ever exported before. Federal Reserve notes. That's what we export. And then, of course, because of the trust in America and the dependence on our ability to create money out of thin air and then do what we want around the world, put on sanctions, and unfortunately participate in all the senseless wars, I would think the American people should rise up. 20 years is long enough to have troops in Afghanistan. We ought to just come home.
But I don't know about you, but we're seeing a trend from Lavish and Olden to RFK Jr. to Larry Fink to Lawrence Lepard, who worked for Paul's presidential campaign not that long ago, Michael Saylor. They've all hit on the implications of de-dollarization, inflation, the Fed's money printer, the invisible tax of inflation, and where that leads the dollar. Many of these guys probably learned from the great doctor himself. And as Nico said today, sometimes years happen in weeks, and an economic whirlwind is continuing to gain momentum. The answer to all these problems, as the doctor said, is freedom. Freedom is the answer. Bitcoiners have had a similar journey to that of Dr. Paul and the Liberty Movement, standing firmly on the principles of truth and liberty his whole life. Dr. Paul is and was one of the most based of all time.
It's the American story. Charting your own path. Forging new ways forward. Not because it's the easy way, but because it's the right way. And for those with dedication, character, faith, and conviction, sometimes that lonely path paves the way forward for millions. Ron Paul, 22 years in Congress, he's never voted for a tax increase, never voted for a debt ceiling increase, never wavered, never backed down.
The role of government ought to be for the protection of liberty, not for the intrusion in our private lives, not for the intrusion in economic affairs.
You can't keep borrowing from China. You can't keep printing the money. We have to cut some spending.
I believe in limited government. I believe in individual liberty.
We've spent too much, we tax too much, we borrow too much.
It's bankrupting this country. We need lower taxes, less regulations, and we need to free up the market.
As long as we live beyond our means, we are destined to live beneath our means.
But there's a new generation of passionate, freedom-first individuals that have emerged in you as the Bitcoiners, advocates for financial sovereignty, taking up the mantle from Ron Paul, carrying the principles of liberty in that sly, roundabout way that Hayek mentioned. Bitcoin's power as a truly decentralized, censorship-resistant money that is free from the control of any central authority empowers individuals, liberating them from the grip of traditional financial institutions and government interference, and of course, central banks.
And unless we get down to the bottom of it and define what inflation is and not look at only prices, this was taught by the free market economists all through the 20th century. They said, beware. They will increase the money supply, but they will make you concentrate on prices. And they will give you CPIs and PPIs, and they'll fudge those figures, and they'll talk about wage and price controls to solve our problems. And we ignore the fundamental flaw, and that is that not only have we had a subprime market in housing, the whole the whole economic system is subprime in that we have artificially low interest rates. And it wasn't under your tenure in office. It's been going on for 10 years or longer, and now we're bearing the fruits of that policy. I mean, a 1% interest rate, overnight rates, and that's not a distortion. Instead of looking at these the consumer prices, which nobody in this country really believes, we need to talk about the distortion, the malinvestment, the misdirection, the bad information that is gotten from artificially low interest rates. In many ways, some people refer to you as a price fixer, because you fix interest rates. The market is powerful and usually overwhelms and does come into play, but when the Fed fixes an interest rate at 1%, that is price fixing. At the end of your testimony, you suggested that we should address this housing crisis and we should have rules that would address deceptive lending practices. And I just think that is not the answer at all. The real deception is when we distort the value of money, when we create money out of thin air. We have no savings, yet there's so-called capital, there's money available, but it comes from what you have to do and the pressure is put on you. So I think we have to get back to the very fundamentals of where this problem comes from. And the bubbles occur when we have this malinvestment and the creation of new money. So my question boils down to this: how in the world can we expect to solve the problems of inflation, that is, the increase in the supply of money, with more inflation?
Bitcoiners have become torchbearers of the liberty movement in the digital age. Through their advocacy and promotion of the importance of sound money, privacy, and financial self-sovereignty. And just as Ron Paul challenged the status quo and questioned the Fed's money printing practices, Bitcoiners challenged the traditional financial system, envisioning a future where financial power is decentralized and accessible to all. But Ron Paul, the freedom first, the liberty lovers, sound money enthusiasts, and Bitcoiners, they form a powerful alliance, and it bridges the gap between past and future, uniting the fight for liberty across generations. Paul also reminds us that the struggle for individual freedom is an ongoing journey. It doesn't happen overnight, but that the torch of liberty will be passed from one generation to the next.
A lot of you may have seen a bumper sticker that I have in my office, and because it's been on the internet, and yesterday I had some young kids in the office, as not too unusual, and the students came in and they wanted to get their picture with the bumper sticker. Of course, he allowed me to be in the picture too. But this bumper sticker is very simple. It says, "Don't steal, the government hates competition." And they don't like competition. They don't like competition in running your life. They want to run your life for you. They don't want competition running the economy. They want to run the economy. And of course, they don't like anybody to run their own affairs overseas. They think they're capable and have this obligation to run everybody's affairs overseas as well. So it boils down to a very simple philosophy of what we need. We need to get the government, out of our lives, out of our bedrooms, out of our walls, off our back, and out of foreign countries. And in the meantime, just get rid of the Federal Reserve. Over the many years of speaking out against the Federal Reserve and sound money, it had to be a unique crowd. Those conspiracy nuts and these people to bring up the subject. Yes, we should get out of the UN, and yes, we should get rid of the Federal Reserve. And in that special crowd, you would get these cheers, but something has happened. Something dramatic has happened, and it's happening on the campuses of this country. And some people give me credit. I don't take the credit. I give credit to the academicians, the many people who you've heard speak here, and groups like the Mises Institute who have changed attitudes. And it isn't just a few anymore. It isn't just a unique crowd that believes in the conspiracy. I mean, it's so dangerous now that it has infiltrated college campuses. I mean, I couldn't have possibly influenced these college kids. I mean, one person can't do that. So some of these ideas have infiltrated, and it's getting to be very serious. because you all know the story about what happened at the University of Michigan. I mean, that was startling. It scared me because here I am. It was after the debates over in Detroit. We went over to Ann Arbor, and I got there a little late, and there was a little bit of agitation and frustration, but it was dark, and but there was a large crowd there. I couldn't see the crowd very well. It was that dark, but they said there were a lot of young people there. So I went on and gave my talk and alluded to the monetary system and the Federal Reserve, and all of a sudden a bunch of them started burning Federal Reserve notes. And then they started chanting, "End the Fed, end the Fed." You know, I mean, where did this all come from? So I'm on the receiving of that information and that message. They were telling me to end the Fed. So I said, well, that does sound like a good idea.
But hey guys, here's to the crazy ones, the Bitcoiners courageously marching forward, carrying the torch of liberty and embracing the potential of a decentralized, free market, sound money future. Let the Bitcoiners and liberty maximalist passion and dedication continue to shape the landscape of freedom, leaving an incredible mark on the path towards a more equitable and liberated society, a bright orange future.
There's a lot of people who are despondent, and a lot of people, are euphoric, and they say, I know I'm going to be a millionaire soon, and there's a little bit of discussion going on. But the monetary freedom, though, is an issue that is very, very necessary. We have to have options. There was a bill that I introduced many times in Congress, and the bill was competition in currencies, no legal tender laws. And if you don't like, or the monetary system isn't working and you don't like the dollar, you ought to have the absolute right to use whatever you want for money. And that means you have to repeal the legal tender laws. But, there's a disadvantage of just trying to use anything for money if the government wants control, because they tend to want to regulate and tax. And you don't regulate and tax money. That'd be like if you're into the dollar business, which I doubt if too many people would be doing this, that you buy dollars and the value of the dollar goes up 10%. That's a capital gains tax, and they put a tax on it. But that's what they do whether you're using metals or cryptos. If they know what you're doing, that's what they'll want to do. They will want to tax, and that's what's so neat about my continuing understanding of exactly how Bitcoin works, is that you try to avoid that nonsense in a very legal fashion, because you cannot trust the people who decide what monetary freedom means. The people who should make the decisions are you. Individuals should make the decision on what you want to do.